Has society lost its ethical moral compass? Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Holst. I'm a global leadership doctoral student from Indiana Institute of Technology. And today I will be going over my 3-month research on the topic of ethical leadership training for education for sustainable development. By the end of my presentation, I hope to answer how research and theory from the growing field of global leadership can help us to focus on the ethical dimensions of leadership for education that must engage beyond the human. So let's get started. This is what I will cover today. First, I will give you the problem and purpose of my study. Then I will provide you the theoretical framework, methods, and design. Following that, I will go over my research questions and the article review. Then I will go over the data collection, including coding analysis and major themes. Finally, I will go over my findings, significance of findings, and then offer some recommendations. Leaders today are tasked to be future-focused, work in ambiguity, change, and crisis, be environmentally conscious, and promote ethical behavior and standards all at the same time. Despite ethical leadership concepts being well studied, there is little research on ethical leadership training regarding sustainability. There is also limited research on leader values, ethics and style, and corporate social responsibility. Since educational institutions can advance the sustainable goals of 2030, it's imperative for ethical leadership training for ESD to be developed and implemented alongside them. This paper aimed to connect theories in the field of global leadership with new ideas for education for sustainable development. There is a lack of research on challenges that universities face when creating curriculum and implementation for sustainability. We also know that there's many connected leadership styles that can lead or are attached to ethical leadership. Therefore, aligning leadership type to the concepts of ESD can help develop a framework for a moral compass. We also know that there's a large amount of literature on educational philosophy, especially around justice, care, and virtue. Despite the ethical efforts in schools to train the leaders of today, there is obviously increased pressure to meet the expectations of the SDG goals. So therefore, a moral compass needs to be set as soon as possible to support the ethical decision making. The purpose of my study was to develop the new perspectives of a theoretical model. The hope was to provide a model for leadership development, to connect educators and students with a useful methodology, and to increase the quality of grounded research published in the ethical leadership training for the ESD field. I framed this study against the backdrop of ethical theories, leadership types, and gaps in research in relationship to the development of ethical judgment in educators. In order to create a theory for developing a solid moral compass, I had to delve into many components, including the dimensions of sustainability, factors affecting ethical training for ESD, and ethical theories on leadership approaches. In this study, I mainly focused on the different types of leadership theories, ethical theories, and ethical theories on leadership approaches, and one particular ethical leadership framework of Lawton and Paez. My theoretical framework included the study of different types of leadership theories, including transformational, transactional, and authentic leadership styles. While they all have their own unique elements, transformational leaders stood out as the best matched for ethics, and this is the style I modeled for creating the conceptual framework toward a moral compass. Transformational leaders have shown to have the ability to motivate others to follow moral-based visions. Another framework used for the study was an ethical framework consisting of ethical theories on leadership approaches, and ethical leadership. Ethical theories provide the decision-making foundation and represent the viewpoints from which individuals seek navigation in making choices. Ethical leadership is broken down in literature and studied by the characteristics of an ethical leader, the relationship between being a good leader ethically and being an effective leader, and how leaders keep self-interest, the interest of the organization, and interest of the community balanced. Ethical principles include doing what is right and good involves the least harm to the fewest people. The ethical standard of approach I took for my framework was consequentialist, duty, and virtue. Consequentialism holds that the consequences of one's conduct are the ultimate basis of any judgment about what is right or wrong. Duty-based theory states that people should follow their obligations and duties when occupied while making ethical decisions. Finally, the virtue ethical theory judges a person by their character rather than by an action that motivates an individual in each situation. This research uses a classical grounded theory method design using a systematic procedure. I conducted a comparative method and conceptual analysis that reviewed the 15 pieces of literature to identify the research gaps in ethical leadership training for ESD, exploring leadership theories, current models and frameworks, and finding emergent themes. I then took and used patterns and themes to identify categories and concepts to develop an ethical theoretical framework. There were 3 phases of coding that I performed. In open coding, I looked for major categories based on research theories, research questions, and gaps in literature. In axial coding, I found causal conditions related to ethical leadership training for ESD, using a comparative process comparison to determine further themes. Finally, I used selective coding where I developed relational statements, which resulted in a conditional relationship guide and matrix statements. This resulted in a theoretical framework for finding a moral compass using a transformational leadership style. There was 1 central research question and 7 sub-questions that guided the study. The central question was, what is a theory that explains what it means to cultivate a solid moral compass for leaders in education for sustainable development? Sub-questions looked at questions about leadership training facilitators, what ethical leaders do and don't do, what leadership types help to promote establishing a moral compass, what gaps and factors there are in leadership in relationship to developing ethical judgment, and what theoretical frameworks are available in cultivating a moral compass. I performed an EBSCO host search, and I used the keywords sustainable development education and ethical judgment and global leadership, and I yielded 1,573 searches. After going through and finding the relevant keywords again, the list was reduced to 208. A quality check disqualified 77 other articles that were disqualified for non-applicability, and most of the articles were published between the last 10 years. The final data set of the articles yielded 15 articles that were then used in my study. They were in the fields of sustainability, social and behavioral sciences, education, business, and management, and they included 7 countries. The 15 articles met the criteria of my keywords of leadership development, ethical leadership, and education for sustainable development. For each article, the review analyzes the construct, origin of country, education level, conceptual framework, method of study, tools used, sample of study, key issues studied, main findings and gaps in research, and implications of study. My research determined that there are a lot of gaps in ethical leadership development in ESD. Gaps determined included connecting the SDG goals to outcomes for educational outcomes. There is a lack of responsibility to sustainability and aligning core values with sustainability in the role for ethical leadership in higher education institutes, and gaps in development of ethical judgment in educators in the day-to-day performance and communication of ethical standards. Finally, I found there's a lack of adaptive culture around the complex intelligence of processing and employing functional information around ethical standards, which adds to the complication of integrating ethics of ESD and leadership development. I had quite a few major themes that arose during initial coding, looking at values, approaches for decision making, and the interplay of curriculum, ethics, and other factors that integrate into personal ethics such as society, testing, and learning. Other themes in leadership looked at leadership strategies, the role of values, beliefs, and behavioral norms, the role of sustainability in judgment, and strategies in meeting ethical standards of participation to meet ethical goals, and the significance in ethics and its implementation in schools. Personal themes of mindset, attitudes, culture, views about interconnectedness with sustainability and reflection, social processes and dilemmas that cause leaders to reevaluate their beliefs and values also came up. Through the process of reflection of how each dimension helped to understand the process, and after many tries, I narrowed down the list of processes to making ethical decisions as a major core category. I used transformational leadership as a guide in this conditional relationship guide by pulling in characteristics of transformational leadership in the how column. This guide is an overarching guide for transformational leaders in making ethical decisions. I used reflexive coding matrix as a guide to develop the storyline. Each concept on the matrix includes causal conditions, context, intervening conditions, actions, interactions, and consequences. These helped me to articulate the core category of the justifications of a leader for their actions in ethical decision making and in choosing the best ethical alternative in a situation. The relational matrix clearly displayed, as described by the gaps in research that connect decision making to new ideals aligned with the underpinnings of transformational leadership. Findings in relation to ethics supports the claim that ethics is marginalized in ESD and that a framework for ethical leadership pertaining to leadership styles are needed to be set. According to my findings, there also seems to be confusion and lack of consensus in sustainability, agency, value-based practices of ethical leadership in higher education institutions, as well as efficacy, literacy, core values of ESD, general ethic concern in integrating sustainability with a focus on ethics in education and at a leadership development level. So my findings in ethical decision making, it showed that decisions in a leadership setting was dependent on personal dimensions of the leaders who were making the decisions. Also, sustainability in higher education and their role into making judgment was also a factor. Also, ethical foundations, how ethical standards and rules were used in normal situations in cases of dilemmas, risk, and ambiguity. So pretty much this showed that making ethical decisions, leaders must meet the standards, judgment, and actions, and they must also believe that their mindset, values, and responsibility will guide their outcomes. Here are some causes that was found to influence ethical decision making and intervening conditions that can get in the way of making decisions. I found that the position of the leader, how to choose the best ethical alternative, the relationship between a good leader and being an effective leader, and the leadership type and value approach taken can all influence leaders in making ethical decisions. Things that can get in the way of making an ethical decision are influence of society, stakeholders and employees, vested interest, interdisciplinary curriculum, complex problems, and dilemmas that can cause leaders to reevaluate their beliefs and values at any time. Some of the big codes for leaders that emerged in axial coding included when to make decisions and how to make decisions and under what expectation and circumstances. Leaders' viewpoints can get in the way of ethical leadership development. I found that other decision-making factors to consider with ethical leadership development for ESD included culture, mindset, views about interconnectedness with natural world and sustainability, also management challenges, scaling practices, commitment, individual responsibility to the SDGs and agency, ethical literacy and ethic concern for the planet, leadership styles, and common visions for sustainability can all be factors in leadership development training for ESD. The ethical theoretical framework consists of 3 approaches to take, weighing the consideration that impact the choice of a course of action, and then provides the guidance for implementing the decision based from the dimensions of transformational leadership. In this framework, an individual can recognize an ethical issue, choose a source of ethical standard of approach, consequentialist, duty, or virtue, and then implement the decision by using each of the dimensions of transformational leadership. Lead by example, set expectations, encourage learning and growing, inspiring to go to new heights, and coaches and empowers success. Making ethical decisions requires a practice method, but when you practice it regularly, the method will become automatic. Here are additional emergent themes that came up and can be sources for further study or taking into consideration when developing ethical leadership development. The significance of findings to the leadership field can help facilities and in more understanding of what the gaps are of ethical decision making in education for sustainable development. It can also provide students, leaders, schools, HR, and the ESD field with further information. The study can fill in the knowledge gap about cultivating a solid moral compass for leaders in education for sustainable development. The factors revealed can be helpful in directing ethical decision-making efforts to relevant areas. Future research can be conducted on how the current ethical leadership framework could serve as a guide to developing a moral compass for other leadership styles. Okay, other recommendations include finding a way to meet the ethical standards of participation, to make ethical the norm. Also understanding others and their motives, especially in developing countries, during the ethical decision-making process. Having access to effective teaching methods, tools to carry out judgment, and methodologies and practices that can help transformational learning, can help transformational leaders in enforcing their moral compass. Also having ethical leadership testing and having longitudinal studies that can help in the understanding of participation can be helpful, as well as aligning with other issues of SDGs, such as environmental issues and societal and cultural considerations are other recommendations. As with any studies, there are some limitations. Potential limitations include lack of cases in order to identify the patterns to get a balanced comparison. I only had 15 studies that might not have been representative, and also the findings may not be transferable to all situations. Further study include study of ethical competence to ESD, to also include ethical influence and job satisfaction, practitioner and ethical conflict, value and virtue of ethics in the education leadership field, more study on how a leader can accomplish or what they can accomplish in reflection, what is the right way to be reflective, and perhaps exploration of spiritual leadership that showed up in my study. And even conflict, knowing what the conflict between practitioner and leader or leader and follower could be valuable future further studies. Once again, I wanted to thank you for the time that you have provided me. I hope you enjoy the presentation, and if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you so much for the opportunity.